Welcome to the first of our series highlighting women in technology. My name is Greg Waters and I'm your host tonight. The organization sponsoring us today is a charitable education company called Microfacturing Institutes, who creates education and job training in science, technology, and engineering skills, and can be completed in about a year of effort. You can check out the program at www.microfacturingusa.org. We're going to run for about 45 minutes, and there will be room for Q&A. If you have a question you'd like answered, please enter that into the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can. So without further ado, we're very honored to welcome Ritu Favre tonight. I myself have been running global semiconductor companies for the past 15 years and met Ritu about 5 years ago. She has a terrific background to speak about the needs of today's tech industry broadly and how we can improve the role of women in this great industry. Ritu has run really large organizations at big companies like Motorola, and most recently was even CEO of a startup company before joining NI in her current role, which is Senior Vice President and General Manager of the Semiconductor Division. So welcome and thanks very much for joining us, Ritu. I know there's a lot of people on the call interested to hear about your career journey.
Thanks so much for having me, Greg. It's been really, really exciting to join you here today.
And happy to have you. So for starters, not everybody has heard of NI, formerly known as National Instruments. So just for grounding, why don't you tell people a little bit about NI, the types of businesses you're in, and what you do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been here at NI for about a year, and it's a really, really cool company. I've learned a lot about it. We're about 40 years old, and we develop automated test and automated measurement systems that really help engineers solve the world's toughest challenges. We have a slogan called Engineer Ambitiously, and I would say that we truly do engineer ambitiously at NI. We help engineers connect solutions through software. And then inside the semiconductor BU, which is the group that I lead, we're really focusing on reducing our customers' time to revenue. We help streamline their product introduction process from design verification through silicon characterization and production test using connected software systems.
Well, super. And with respect to that title, those last two words in your title of general manager, that means that you not only have to direct all that complicated activity, but you need to make money in that. And look, you've had a terrific career. You have done well in, as far as I know, every place that you've landed, and it's far from over, I think. But in terms of women in tech, I mean, tell us a little bit about your story. I mean, how'd you pull that off? What worked for you? And in an industry that is still dominantly run by men, you've done quite well. So what worked for you? How did you do this?
Yeah, so I'll kind of back up and start kind of talking a little bit about my career and sort of how I progressed through my journey. And then I'll definitely kind of weave in the being a woman in technology. As you know, we've talked about this over many breakfasts. I'm very, very passionate about this topic. So again, really, really happy to be able to talk about it. So I would say first and foremost, I've had a really fulfilling career in the tech industry. I got my bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering at a very young age. I graduated from high school when I was 15, so I was the biggest nerd of all time. I took calculus, physics, chemistry, biology, all at the same time in my final year of high school. So while everybody was doing the prom and cheer and football, I was hitting the books pretty hard. So I started working at Motorola on the rotational program when I was 19. I got asked all the time if I was a technician or an operator because there's no way that I could have an engineering degree at that age. I was raised in an Indian household, so I was actually pretty shy and introverted. So anybody that's on this call that knows me today will know that that seems very, very crazy, but I was a very, very shy kid. I began working in a wafer fab as my permanent placement after I finished through the rotation. Loved working in manufacturing, loved being in the factory, loved just the whole, that you would go home at the end of the day and know that you kept turns going and you kept that line running. Was a lot of fun. So I wore a bunny suit every day. I was deep into CV plots, which are capacitance voltage plots, characterizing all of our devices for automotive and communication infrastructure. And about 4 years into my journey, again, I'm this really nerdy person sitting in the bunny suit deep in the bowels of our factory. 4 years into my time at Motorola, I was asked to take a first line manager role, which I was totally shocked about. It was like, huh, what? I don't want to be a manager. I'm not interested in that. I have a master's in electrical engineering. I'm just going to be super technical. And as I look back at my journey, there were a few things that were going on at that time. Motorola at that time, again, looking back with 30 years of experience now, really had a commitment to improving their diversity of thinking. And I think that's a theme throughout this entire dialogue that I want to have, is that we really have to bring different perspectives and really think it in a more diverse way. So in that rotation program that we were going into, there was a lot of women, a lot of people of color that came into engineering roles in the company at that time. And then the second thing that I've reflected on since that time is that there was a lot of strong mentorship programs, even though it wasn't really called mentorship at that time. If you talk about these things now, there's mentors and sponsors, and there's a lot of different things that are discussed. But at that time, I had a lot of strong mentors, even though I didn't know it at the time. I will say that even today, from my early days at Motorola, I still have these strong and engaged mentors. When I was running my startup in Norway, you had helped me quite a bit. And then I also have several people to this day that are still mentors from that time. And then the third thing I would say is that Motorola had a leadership development pipeline that really were allowing people that showed potential to be considered for management positions pretty early in their careers. And that, I think, was pretty forward thinking, again, looking back. So we had a technical ladder, which I always had assumed that I would go up the technical ladder, and then a management ladder. And I was selected pretty early in my career for this management ladder, and then began moving up the ranks at Motorola. And what I really found worked well for me was, first of all, to just do the best work that I could possibly do. Communicate as widely as I could, set and clarify expectations, and then continuing to find mentors through my journey at Motorola. And as time went on, in the beginning, it was much more of a line manager, so it was pretty clear what I needed to do. But as I went up in the organization, I needed to start figuring out, how do I navigate the organization? How do I navigate the politics? How do I think about my career? How do I get the technical help that I need, but then also the sort of this political help that you need? So as I kind of continued on at Motorola, I was there for 25 years. So Motorola became Freescale. I went into their executive leadership ladder, progressed through director, VP, senior VP roles, and learned a lot. It was a phenomenal experience. After about 25 years there, I decided it was time to move to a new company. And I reached out to a recruiter to help me with the search. She was super honest with me, and it's somebody that, you know, we can talk about that another time. But she said, Ritu, after 25 years at one company, frankly, it's going to be really difficult for you to move to another company. It's great that you've had such a good career, but you have to show that you're open to moving and trying new experiences. And I'll say that I'll always remember that advice, the advice and guidance that she gave me. We did work together for some time. This is another sort of, I would say, kind of interesting journey in my own career. I did not know that you should talk to recruiters when you've been working at a company, but we worked together for a while, and I eventually moved up here to the Bay Area to Synaptics and became SVP and GM of their fingerprint sensing business, where again, I just learned so much. It was a startup that had been acquired into Synaptics, which was a much larger company. There were a lot of integration challenges as they were bringing the organization into Synaptics. It was a brand new technology, capacitive fingerprint sensing. It was going into one of the largest phone makers, new launch, and there were a lot of gaps in the technology. This was a tough business to run. I'll say that I always have had a passion and curiosity to learn new things, and I was drinking from a fire hose in that position. After a few years, I was then recruited to run a publicly traded Norwegian company called Next Biometrics. And it was a cool role because it built on the knowledge of the biometrics experience that I picked up at Synaptics. but I was really involved with the strategy of the company. And so it was, how do we build a multi-market, multi-product business model? And in that, I learned a lot about analysts, investors, bankers, public reporting, earning reports, and most of all, fundraising. Again, learned a lot here. You helped me a lot through that role. Again, really, really appreciate that. And what I figured out as I continued to progress in my career is that I learned I needed to find experiences that I was curious about, that I could find something of value that I could contribute into that role, and then also something that I could learn more from. And I would say that's really become a guiding principle in my career, to find roles where the technology is interesting, the organization is willing to transform, and the right market intersection can really be found to grow the business. So far, I'd say I've been at NI for a year. I'm loving my role, and a lot of those pieces that I was talking about, I've found here. So it's been a great move.
Yeah, and glad to see you there. So I want to pick up on a couple of things you just mentioned. And the first one is mentorship. And I'd like you to say a few words about what that really meant to you and why it worked. Because if I look at a lot of companies have a mentorship program, and they may call it something different. And very often, in fact, I think most often, this starts out with a great surge of energy. There's a bunch of power lunches and power breakfast that happens, and then it becomes lame, right? It doesn't necessarily translate into, okay, it goes from, it remains only a relationship, right? And maybe there's a little bit of advice, but when you talk about mentorship, you've got a lot more energy around that. So can you give a few specific examples of what should a mentor look like? I mean, what helped you in the past coming from some of these key mentors?
Yeah, what I would say, one of the most important pieces, which sounds maybe a little bit mercenary, but it's, you really, as the mentee, you need to know what you're looking for and what is it that you're trying to get out of that relationship. So if you think about it, you're going to go to somebody with some set of experiences or something, and you need to be really clear about what you're looking for in that relationship and really drive that relationship forward. And I agree with you that it turns into, it can become, well, especially these company sponsored mentorship things. Okay, so let me just start with that. That I find to be very forced and pretty difficult. It needs to be sort of, in my case, I found mentors and would say, hey, I really want to talk to you, and I have this particular thing that I need to get some help with. And so I think it's kind of having that confidence with, here's what I'm for, this is what I need. Are you willing to be my mentor or sponsor, or just somebody that I can get a lot of advice from as I'm going through my career? And I think that was the key for me from a mentor perspective. Motorola had a mentor program, like you said. We would get these papers, we would match people together. Half the time the people didn't get along very well, and then it would sort of fall apart. And I think the most important piece is that you have a mentor that's motivated, and you have a mentee that really is looking at what they are looking for out of that interaction. And then being pretty kind of prescriptive about it, so that it's not just, hey, let's have a conversation once a week or once a month or once a year, but try to solve something particular that you're working through, and have someone that can give you feedback. This is where, you know, you really need to be thinking about what you're doing.
Yeah, very cool. In other words, approach mentors that wouldn't normally be in your own network, you know, automatically, and begin with the end in mind, something like this. Right. Yeah, got it. So here's another question for you. Just listening and watching to the arc of your career, you've done a lot of different things. I mean, you had a high-powered degree, you went into engineering, you did the hard stuff really quickly. But in your current role, you manage, marketing, product definition. What do we build next? You've got the R&D function. We got to build it, which has got its own drama. You got to get customers that want to buy this stuff and manage the P&L. So it's all these wildly different skills that roll up to the great general managers of the world. Now, here's my question. Those skills are hard to attain, and they for anybody. You've got to do many different things in a career to get that. Now, right or wrong, from my perspective, on average, and there's many exceptions, I think men in their career are more open to blundering their way through into a job way or assignment without necessarily knowing what the hell we're doing right away. In other words, everybody gets measured by results. You know, this comes true. I think women on average want to know what the hell they're doing before they attempt to do it. Now, which one of those styles is the best style? They both are good, right, on this thing. But one, do you think that's accurate? And do you think that that lack of, bluff it until you can deliver it holds women back in some cases?
Yeah, that's the whole fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. I've thought a lot about that. I'm gonna pivot a little bit to give you some examples of what I've seen, and that as you and I have discussed it, I think this goes back much, much further than just coming straight out of university. This goes back in society to kind of the very beginning. One of the things that I've observed is in the entire education pipeline, there is a message to little girls and women that you're just not going to be good at math and science. So as you get into tech, and I will get to that portion of the question, but you and I have talked about my daughter, and my passion has been getting women into STEM and women into technology. And when people ask me, what are you doing about that? My biggest thing that I'm doing is raising a daughter to be very strong and to be able to, kind of be tough in this way. And her and I have spent a lot of time talking about this. Her teachers, as she was growing up, would say, oh, you're in that really hard math. You don't need to do that. You know what? We should switch you out of that. You don't want to be doing that. That's just hard. And what I found is that sort of message is conveyed to little girls and women in so many subtle ways all the time. And so this whole notion of women will want to be more, the way that I described it is, you're going to want to be perfect and even a little more perfect before you're going to come in and speak up in a meeting or be able to state your opinion, then you will see with men. And the other example that I was going to use as well is there have been so many meetings that I've been in my career where I will make a comment or a statement and there's dead silence. The room is dead silence. Of course, let's be clear, this room is usually filled with everybody's a man except for me. I mean, the number of meetings that I've been in where it's all men and me. So then I'll speak up and there'll be dead silence, just dead wall of silence. The meeting will continue. 5 to 10 minutes later, some male colleague will make a comment that's almost identical. And it's like, oh, wow, what a great idea. That's a brilliant statement. And so what I would say is that this is part of what ends up kind of perpetuating both the myth as well as it forces women to hang back, because you end up in these meetings and you end up in these forums where you'll get this subtle feedback that's like, no, you got to just go try a little bit harder. You got to go just do a little bit more. Where again, I'll see a male colleague that will just completely be bluffing. And it's clear, as peers, as your peers, or you'll see your subordinates, it's very clear that it's a bluff, but they will they'll go and they'll continue. And so I do think that ends up holding women back to some extent in their careers. Obviously, we should be doing better as well, but I've seen that a lot.
Yeah, and it's, so have I. By the way, and we'll come back to this topic about when, for instance, as time allows, we got a lot of topics to talk about tonight, but as time allows, we'll come back to that. But when something for you to think about for later, Ritu, is when faced in that situation, what do you do? I'm sure people will be interested. Okay, what's maybe more than one right thing to do, but since that seems to be reality more often than not, then what do you do? So let me now switch gears. We've talked about the arc of your career, and I think your best days are in front of you. You've done all these amazing things, but I want to talk about some people and some women may find your background a bit intimidating, right? You've got a formidable set of, a resume. You've got a hardcore degree. You're a real engineer, right? And you came up your engineering ranks, which is tough, and this sort of thing. So for people and women, men and women on the call that aren't, stereotypical engineers, computer scientists, STEM degreed, for women, why should they bother with tech? So look, there are industries that are dominated by women now, right? Why not just do those? Certainly easier in some ways, perhaps. So for people that are considering a career in tech, and I mean tech broadly, I'd actually argue every job is a tech job today, or it's becoming one. Why should women bother with tech?
So the first thing I would say is it's just super fun. I mean, you get to, the first part is you have to get away from the stigma of it's hard, it's tech. It's just, I think it's one of the most fulfilling, most fun careers there are to be had, despite all of the challenges that I'm talking about. And as I started this, I've had a very fulfilling career in tech. And I think it's trying to demystify or destigmatize math, science, any of these engineering kinds of degrees. So if you say, all right, why even bother? For males and females, the first thing I would say is, I do think we need to, as a society, reconsider whether you have to have that 4-year degree to be able to do some of these kinds of roles in these jobs. And you and I've talked about that a lot in relation to Microfacturing Institute. There's a lot of roles inside tech that would be very well served by having some analytical skills, but not having to have that full 4-year degree.
Yep.
I think one thing that has been sad to me is that there are a lot of women that end up exiting for some of the reasons that I was talking about, where it's not easy to be the only woman in a particular room, but they'll exit and then they'll have these very fulfilling careers. For me, I just realized I love the pace. I love the semiconductor industry. At one point in my career, I was also contemplating, do I just kind of exit and go get a PhD and become a professor? I mean, that was one of the things I'd considered. And I think it's just the pace, the amount of different things that you get exposed to, solving complex problems, getting on the forefront of like the newest technology. So I mean, again, at NI, I just have a blast every day because it's like, oh, 5G, like what are we going to be doing in 5G? And then what are the technologies that will enable 6G? I was talking to somebody that was saying there's going to be sensors everywhere in the world. You don't even need to have a phone anymore. Basically, humans are going to be walking and these sensors are recording everything. And as I was thinking about that, I was like, wow, that is incredibly cool. And so for me, that's why people should consider tech, whether it's a male or a female. It is incredibly fun to work on the forefront of technology and solve really hard problems.
Yeah, how well said. And, for what it's worth, I couldn't agree with you more. It's great fun. Tech broadly, it's fantastic. And I think the people that wash up ashore in tech you have to be kind of crazy to work in tech. It's demanding, it's fast paced, it is not for the faint of heart. And you have to be that kind of person. But it's basically an exercise, wouldn't you agree, in problem solving. If you like, kind of figuring out, okay, there's a new puzzle that maybe it hasn't been done before, or they need to come up with a better way, that's tech. And sometimes the answers to those problems are very low tech, right? It's not always the rocket scientists that win in these things, but that's tech. And I would add one more point to it is tech on average pays a lot better than most jobs, right? It is, if you can get into these good jobs, they pay really well, right? So, which is another reason I'd like to see more women in tech. Okay, another theme, I'm skipping around a little bit, but I want to touch as many broad themes. You've had a fantastic career. You have worked very hard to achieve what you had. If you could magically go back in time 10 years ago, or pick any team, what would you tell yourself? What advice would you give to a younger Ritu?
There's a lot of advice I would give to young Ritu, the 19-year-old at Motorola. So my first thing, couple things I would say. First is find your voice, find it early, make sure you speak up, make sure you keep speaking up. So back to that earlier comment that I was making, if someone talks over you, diminishes what you say, you need to come back, say it again, just continue to say it. Be kind, be respectful, but make sure that your point is made and it's heard. If you're not able to do it in a large forum, take it offline, speak one-on-one with the people that aren't hearing you, make sure you're heard. I think I would also tell myself to be confident in taking risks, kind of back to what we were talking about earlier. Speak up about bolder approaches that I would push to take. I really used to observe a style and mannerism in my colleagues where I would be really, really cautious. And again, they would confidently jump in, I can do it. And then they would be figuring out how to make it happen. I really would tell myself, It's okay to take a calculated risk. You're gonna fail. It's okay to fail. And for me, that was really hard, 19-year-old Ritu, because I was a perfectionist and I was, straight A student and had always done everything perfectly. And it would really be, it's okay. It's okay if you fail. I'd also say, make sure, really understand the org dynamics and the politics and the power structures and the how to communicate effectively. That was really hard, I would say, in the beginning. When you walk into a company that has 150,000 people, figuring out how to navigate that would have been something that I would have probably talked about a little bit more myself.
Yeah.
And then the other piece would be just seeking and communicating with clarity. Find clarity. There's so many complicated problems, as we were just talking about. There's all of these, it's ambiguous. It's not clear what path to go down. Find clarity, make decisions, move a little bit, fail a little bit, and then kind of keep going. And I think the biggest thing I would tell myself is just have more fun and don't take everything so seriously. Every decision you make is not going to be life or death. It's okay to have a little bit of fun.
Very cool. And just to weigh in a point you already made on that sort of thing, I've seen in executive meetings and board of directors where there's men and women, that exact scenario that you said, right? Where women might get talked over a bit and that sort of thing. And one of the approaches I have learned, right, from my female colleagues is, and it's very effective, is they just will not let that happen ever, right? And certainly there's many ways to do that. But I think reacting with anger in general in executive situations is usually not the best response, right? For men or women on that sort of thing. But the women I know that are good at this, they are very assertive, right? It just is not allowed to happen, and you can, and it works. I think it takes a little extra energy, unfortunately, but I would just second what you said. I think it's really important to find that voice, make sure it's heard at the equal level of anybody else, and not let yourself get overtalked.
Yeah. Hey, so Greg, I'm going to kind of turn it back around to you a little bit. So you've run global tech orgs at scale. What do you think you would do differently now if you could go back 5 years with respect to women in technology?
Yeah, I wish I could, and I'm going to give two answers to that. But the first thing is I want to give just a huge shout to the amazing women that I have worked with and do work with. And some of you may be out there listening tonight, and you know who you are. But the tech business in all of my companies would not be the businesses they were if it weren't for these great women. And it was a blast, right? And this is why we need more women in the game. One of my experiences, right or wrong, is in any business, you have teams of all men. You'll have teams of all women. And on average, and I really believe this, teams of men and women outperform, right? In almost any project on this. So it's not only the right thing to do, it's good for business. Businesses should reflect the societies that we live in, for one. Now, that's a thank you, Graham. But if I could go back in time, 5, 8 years, here's what I would do different. I was convinced not, too many years ago that this problem of underrepresentation of women, of people of color, would go away over some period of time. We just weren't getting enough people with the right degrees coming into this. And I really thought, wow, women in this case are going to see the opportunities. And ladies, if you have the opportunity or are considering a traditional degree, engineering, computer science, math, science, and have the means to do that, go for it. You can write your ticket. And many, many companies want to hire women with this background. But I thought, given enough years, we would see all these new graduates of women with traditional STEM degrees, and voila, problem would be solved. We wouldn't be having this discussion. And I was very, confident that this would happen. And it didn't happen at all. I mean, it didn't happen at all. So, interestingly enough, if you look at the college graduates in the United States of women to men, we graduate more women than men for years. I think at least 3 years, and I think longer. There's more women graduating with traditional degrees than men. But STEM as a percentage has not budged at all, right? In like a decade. In fact, by some measures, it's going down. Now, I think that needs to get corrected too, right? And progressive educators are taking steps in that, progressive companies. That is an issue, and we do need to do some stuff. But if I could go back and do one thing really differently in what I've done in the past, I would have gotten much more unconventional about the way that I recruited and retained women. I would have looked beyond the obvious degrees. I would have figured out how to attract and perhaps train a lot of women in a hurry, right, on that. With relevant technology skills, which is different than traditional degrees. And, and I think it's key. And not only is it key, I think it's very important, and you touched on this, Ritu, is to not just hire the lone woman here or there or 10 of them, is to bring in enough at one time. There is a kind of a natural community, right, which I think matters as well. So I would have gotten much more unconventional and much more aggressive with the types of people I recruited in, particularly women, into my companies if I could do it again.
Yeah, makes sense. And I agree with that, that sense of community, because when I started in my career, there were a lot of women as I looked around. And then the higher I went, and again, I think I talked about the statistic, I think it's something like 1% of women are in these director and above roles. And you start getting to this place where, again, you look around and you're the only female in the room. And that's difficult. And I think, to your point, you have to get a little unconventional, I think.
Yeah. And I think there is a moment right now, this is starting to happen. It's why we started Microfacturing, because we were growing like hell years ago at my last company, really looking for a lot of hiring going on that. Weren't quite finding enough in these non-traditional areas. And there are many great education and job training programs out there. And wherever you live or you're listening, find them in your areas, go for them. But I really believe this strongly. Every job is a STEM job. And if it's not today, it's going to be fairly soon. So I think this is important. But we weren't finding a lot of programs we loved out there. So a bunch of crazy people, including me, decided, what the hell, let's go do it. And Ergo started Microfacturing, which is actually courses designed by people that actually invent stuff in the industry. And you can do it in about a year. But that's one small answer to it, right? But wherever you live, there is something worthwhile, particularly with remote learning these days, that should be able to get you into those skills rather quickly. Okay, Ritu, back to you. Listen, reality is societies are men and women both. And we've talked about increasing the community of women. We've talked about increasing the voice of women. You've talked about your own approach, right, to this sort of thing. But groups of men and women, right, will be working together and run the world. So what's your experience of the best ways to bring together productive groups, right, of men and women both? And how do companies and organizations in general need to be thinking about this differently? How do we make a more positive environment for groups of men and women both?
Yeah, so I'll go with at least starting with women, and then I think that will shape into the how can these be groups of people that can work together to solve challenges. So for me, I think one of the big answers, back to your earlier comment, is I really think men in leadership positions have to really promote a diverse workforce. And I've been in enough companies that I know it's not enough to say, I support women in leadership positions and presto magico, it happens. Again, as we've talked about a lot, it goes back to the education pipeline, the university experience. Part of what I didn't mention earlier is that by the time I got into my master's degree program, I was the only female in that program. And so it does really start back in some of those if you're going for a 4-year. That early career experience becomes really important. And then as you're moving up, I think it becomes important. And so, as I said earlier, I have so many friends that I started with at Motorola that just sort of dropped away for various reasons. And it wasn't just, family came along. It was really, I think that they just didn't have that community. They didn't have the camaraderie. They didn't have the support. And they've ended up with these amazing careers. One of my best friends is basically on the leadership team of the Girl Scouts, one of the smartest women I've ever met in my life. And she's saying, nah, not interested. This has just been, it's been really, really hard. And so I feel like if we want to actually drive real change, we need our male colleagues to come on this journey with us. Understand that it may not resonate, the experience that women or people of color may have may not resonate, but it's real and it can be hard. And so having enough empathy, enough patience, enough sort of listening to see that maybe she's being talked over, or maybe there's this, you know, she has this idea that she's not able to get out there. I think that's what one of the key things there is. And then I had talked earlier as well about this leadership program at Motorola that had to do with really putting people into these leadership roles. And what I found with that, again, it wasn't perfect. None of these are ever perfect, but it did provide an opportunity to get into a role, get that experience, fail kind of quickly, and then move into the next one. Because what I found in my career, I've had, I mean, for all that we talk about, I have a formidable resume. I failed. There's a lot of things that I failed at as I was going through my career, and I learned and I improved from that. And so I will say that again, thanks to my managers, thanks to my mentors, thanks to my family, I've been able to kind of continue and say, I am stubborn like nobody's business. And I'm like, I'm just going to keep going. And I think having that support and inner resilience to kind of deal with all that noise is important. And I really believe our male colleagues are part of this improvement that we need to drive.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And you kind of answered the next thing I was going to ask you is kind of what's the shape of successful companies in the future, right? What type of behaviors they have to have them. Let me ask you a question. You know, it's most of the guys that I know, in fact, the great majority of men that I know in the tech industry want this to happen, right? You know, there's a few knuckleheads in there, but not many, right? So it is, you know, close to me as they want this to happen. But do you agree with this? I think sometimes the guys don't exactly know what to do, right?
Yeah.
So you've kind of got this situation where people might want to help, but they don't want to, for instance, be talking over, interfering. So if you were recruiting somebody, if you're recruiting a guy, right, saying, hey, I'd like you to, here's a way you could help, here's a behavior. Would you hesitate to have the discussion? And on average, how do you think it would go?
I think one of the things that I have embraced or learned is, and everybody that has worked for me will say this, I am probably one of the most radical candor people that there are. And so I am ready to have virtually any conversation, as you know, Greg, with anybody at any time. So yes, I would absolutely be having these conversations with people that report to me. I also have had these conversations with my managers. So every manager that I've ever worked for, I always tell them I'm a tough employee because I am going to, if I see something, I'm definitely going to be saying something about it. And I think that's important. I think that's on women as well to have these conversations. You have to. I think it's the only way that you drive change.
I think so too, right? And I think if behavior is asked for and not given, well, the problem statement is obvious. But I do think at some level, I think the men of the industry who have good intentions, right, broadly on this sort of thing, could use some additional direction from the women at every level, right?
That's right. That's right. And that would be my call to action is speak up. Just even if you think you're going to again fail, you won't fail. And usually there's a good discussion to be had out of it.
Yeah. So Ritu, my last question, then we'll go to a little bit of Q&A, and then we'll give it to you for closing words on this sort of thing. What would your call to action be for women as individuals? Not groups of women, not you know, large organizations of women, but saying, you know, what is really on, what do women need to be doing for themselves, right, to give the best chance, right, of getting to a different type of work environment with a lot more women in the future?
I think it's one woman at a time. I think there's something to be said for, again, I really believe in finding your voice, finding your truth, and making sure that you're speaking up. And the other thing I would say is, if it's not working at your company or in your situation, there's a situation that will work. So if you get to a place where it's, I have done everything I can possibly do and they are just not listening, it's okay to find a different place. They will listen to you.
Right.
And so I would say that, don't be afraid to fail, find your voice, be candid, and move if that's, kind of what it takes.
That is super clear. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ritu Favre, a leader of women and men on that. Let's go to Q&A. We have a few questions crossing the transom here. We will get you out of here for the VP debates, all of you for sure, if you're interested in watching those. But I turn it over to Matt Stillman, who is actually our host behind the scenes. And Matt, why don't you tee up any questions that may have come in for Ritu?
Cool. Well, this first one is from Krista Pavlakos. If you were the CEO of your current company, what would you do differently to bridge the leadership gap?
So I would say, and I'm not here as an advertisement for NI, but it's been so refreshing to work here because half of our leadership team at NI is women. And so I'm actually living what I've wanted to find for my entire career. The male-female gap, there are obviously issues, okay? It's not, utopia, but this is it is the only company I've ever worked at where there were this many females on the leadership team. So my CEO just became CEO. I came here because I was so inspired by him. He really, really believes in diversity of thought, women, people of color, super, super passionate about it. So, I could talk about it for prior companies, but here I felt at this stage in my career, I needed to be in a place that aligned with my values. And when I looked at the leadership team at NI, I was like, wow, this is a place I have to go work.
You moved.
I did, exactly.
Ooh, this next question is from Uma. She's asking, how can we get more females involved and motivated to get into STEM fields?
So this is the one that becomes complicated, and this gets into that education pipeline. This death by 1,000 cuts that women face sort of every day starts way back in elementary school, and pretty much, I think my daughter is on this call. The kinds of things that even she was dealing with through school, you have to encourage your daughters to keep going, because in these STEM fields, they are constantly being told that they're not good enough. And so the parents have to encourage the girls, the teachers have to encourage the girls. Then once you get through that, then get through your engineering degree or your science degree. But I think that's the key, is continue to encourage them.
Awesome. This next question is, you started out in a very technical role and now occupy a more strategic management role. How did you balance this desire to get into the weeds or nerd out on some technical things as opposed to keeping your eye on the bigger picture?
That is an amazing question. And I will say that was probably one of the biggest struggles that I had in the early part of my career, is that I am at heart a geek. My former CFO of my old company that I ran said, Ritu, if you say I'm an engineer, but, quote unquote, one more time, he's like, I'm gonna just, vomit. You have to stop doing that. And my biggest challenge was, I always loved the technical side. I love getting into the details. I love understanding how things work. But I learned over time that I had an ability to synthesize and see direction where sometimes it wasn't clear to other people. And so I've found that I have an ability to create strategy, but then be able to put a plan together that allows you to achieve that strategy. And I think I learned over time that I'm actually pretty good at that side, despite just being the biggest, engineering geek on the planet.
This next question is from Khrushchev. As a female leader, what has been the most significant barrier in your career and how did you overcome it?
I think for me, the biggest, well, I don't know that I had a barrier necessarily. It would be pretty tough to say that because I did progress pretty quickly. But for me, one of the more tough times was when I made the move out of manufacturing and went into a business unit. So if you think about Motorola way back, we used to have factories in the United States. Like I said, I loved my bunny suit, loved being in the fab. And moving from the wafer fab or out of operations and into business management was really hard. I had to learn a completely new set of skills. It wasn't this, you know, click, 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 you're getting wafers out the door at the end of the day. It was, again, you got to learn strategy. You have to have a product plan. As Greg was saying, you got to think about the R&D and the market plan and customers. And that was extremely hard. And it took me, I'd say, and it set me back, if you want to call it that, in my career, because I was a rising star in the operations side, and I made a move into the business side. And it took me probably another 4 or 5 years to get that sort of figured out, and then started to go up sort of the GM path. But yeah, and then again, as I said, don't be afraid to fail and try new things. It's sort of the best way, I believe, to manage your career.
So Matt, we can probably do one more.
Cool. So this next question is, when looking for a mentor, what is your advice in narrowing down a topic when you are passionate about many aspects of science research? And this is coming from a woman in college STEM.
So I think that it's actually very good to have lots of mentors. So find the different areas and then find the right, you know, kind of person that's going to help. So I'll tell you again, my poor daughter who's on this call and is likely like, why does my mother do this to me all the time? But she literally is in university. So she's at UCSC doing an environmental science degree. I'm sure this is shocking. She's in STEM. And she actually joined a mentoring class that UCSC is offering. And they're actually helping with, how do you find mentors? So that's one way to do it. Another way is talk to your professors, find people in industry. Just networking is really, really important. And then find the areas that you're interested in, and then find the person that would know something about it. For me, I talk to so many people. I love talking to people. I'm so curious all the time. Even today, I look for new mentors and in particular topics or particular areas. So kind of always be curious, and you'll find the people that you'd be interested in speaking with, and they'll be interested in speaking to you.
So Ritu, thank you very much. Thank you, Matt. That brings us about to time. And for all of you on the call, thank you so much for joining us. I think it's such an important topic, and I am optimistic in a practical sort of way that 5 years from now, we can be having a different discussion, right, about the roles of women in tech and women in society broadly. You'll get a very quick and simple survey about topics you'd like to see expanded on in the future. We will be back with more of these in the future, and if you'd like to be informed of those, let us know through Matt. But Ritu, I would like to first thank our audience for joining and turn it back to you, Ritu, for the last word. Would you close us up, please?
Yeah, I wanted to thank you, Greg, for having me. It's been a lot of fun. You know, I have a ton of passion around this area. Really, really excited about how to inspire women to get into STEM kinds of areas, about tech, and really enjoying being on the Microfacturing Institute board with you. So really, really want to thank you for everybody's time and your time. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you, Ritu. We really appreciate your time. You are a very, very busy person, and just the fact that you will take time for something like this is a great deal about your leadership and your characters. So thank you, Ritu. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we will call it a night.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.